It shouldn't be there. Picture the scene. The damp, cloying air of a deep coal mine, the smell of ancient earth, and pressure thick in your lungs. A geologist's hammer, wielded for the 1000th time, strikes a newly exposed seam of bituminous coal. Not with a dull thud, but with a sharp, metallic ring that cuts through the silence. The black rock falls away, and inside, nestled in a tomb 300 million years old, is something impossible. It's not the fossil of a fern, not the imprint of a prehistoric insect. It's a gear, perfectly machined, its teeth precise, its metallic surface gleaming coldly in the beam of a headlamp. Geologists date the coal deposit to the Carboniferous period, an era of giant insects and sprawling swamp forests, long before the dinosaurs, long before the first primate even dreamed of walking upright. Official records, the history we are all taught, will tell you this is impossible. They will call it a hoax, or perhaps a strange, natural concretion that merely mimics a man-made object. But the chilling precision of the object defies such easy dismissal. It is a calculated piece of technology, an artifact with no place in our accepted timeline. This single terrifying object raises a question that history has tried to bury. If this was here 300 million years ago, then who or what made it? This gear is not the end of the story. It is the first key. It unlocks a door into a past far deeper and darker than we have ever been told, a history that has been systematically erased. And what we are about to show you is not just a theory, it is the evidence, piece by shocking piece, that proves the story of humanity is a lie. And now, please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. That object, that impossible gear in the stone, is a profound and unsettling contradiction. To understand just how deeply it breaks reality, we first have to understand the official story it defies. From our earliest school days, we are taught a neat, clean history of ourselves. It begins on the dusty plains of Africa, millions of years in the past. We see the familiar ascent of man, a stooped, ape-like creature, Australopithecus, bravely stands on 2 legs, freeing its hands. Over the next million years, its brain slowly grows. Homo habilis, the handyman, appears, chipping away at river stones to create the first crude tools. The timeline marches forward, a slow, brutal, but ultimately linear progression. Homo erectus masters fire, a flickering point of light in an endless darkness, allowing our ancestors to cook food, stay warm, and scare away predators. Finally, after millions of years of gradual change, we arrive, Homo sapiens, us. We emerge roughly 200 years ago, anatomically modern, our brains capable of abstract thought, of art, of language. We paint haunting beasts on cave walls, we form complex societies, and we spread across the globe, the undisputed masters of the planet. This is the history written in our textbooks, carved into museum displays, and supported by a mountain of fossil evidence. It's a history that is logical, painstakingly assembled, and evidence-based. It has no room for machined gears in ancient coal. The story is clean, it makes sense. And it is, as newly discovered documents now prove, fundamentally incomplete. Because in a dusty, forgotten archive, the private journal of a 19th century man of science tells a very, very different story. And his measurements don't just challenge our history, they shatter it. That clean, linear story of our ascent is comforting. But history is never that simple. The real story isn't found in the polished exhibits of a museum, but in the documents they hide in the basement. For over a century, one such document sat in a sealed archival box, its pages yellowed and brittle. The private journal of Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch was no mystic. He was a stern, respected London physician and a man of empirical science. In 1888, while overseeing his company's mining interests high in the remote Andes, his workers broke through a wall of rock into a dry, sealed cavern. What they found inside shattered Finch's scientific reality. In his diary, in a shaky but precise script, he describes not a tomb, but a graveyard. He writes of skeletal remains of a scale that defies all biological reason. Giants not of myth, but of flesh and bone. He was a physician. He knew anatomy. He meticulously documents a cranial capacity that, in his words, would make a modern man a simpleton. Then comes the measurement that chills you to the bone. He measured a single femur, a thigh bone, at 1.5 meters. That's 5 feet. A single bone nearly the height of a person. Now, if you search the official museum acquisition records from that time, you'll find a brief entry. It lists the find as anomalous megafauna, an academic term for a big, weird animal. And then the record goes silent. But Alistair Finch's private diary, a document he never intended for public view, tells a different, more terrifying story. It's the first documented crack in the official narrative, and it raises a disturbing question. If one such discovery was so easily buried, how many others are out there, just waiting to be found? Dr. Finch's diary is a chilling testament, but it's the moment you realize he wasn't alone that the true dread sets in. His discovery wasn't an isolated anomaly, it was a single thread. And once you start pulling on it, the entire tapestry of accepted history begins to unravel. Suddenly, you see the pattern everywhere, hidden in plain sight across centuries and continents. You find it in the oldest writings of humanity, the Sumerian clay tablets. Archaeologists label their stories of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years as myth, their constant references to the ones who came before as religious poetry. But what if it was literal history? You see it in medieval maps, documents like the Piri Reis, which show the coastline of Antarctica, a continent we didn't officially discover until 1820, with an accuracy that should have been impossible. Cartographers of the time had no way of knowing what was beneath the ice. Yet, there it is, drawn with chilling precision. You even find it in the sealed court documents of the Spanish Inquisition, where condemned explorers gave terrified confessions, not of heresy, but of what they found in the unexplored jungle. They spoke of stumbling upon silent, abandoned cities made not of stone, but of smooth, green glass that hummed with a strange energy. These accounts were dismissed as demonic delusion, the ravings of madmen. But when you place them alongside the maps, the tablets, and a Victorian doctor's diary, they stop looking like madness. One anomaly is a curiosity. 2 is a coincidence. But dozens? That's not a coincidence anymore. That is a pattern. And it's not an accident. It is a deliberate, meticulous, and terrifying erasure. The real question isn't whether our history is wrong. The question is, who has been working so hard to keep us from seeing the truth? This pattern of erasure isn't random. It's too consistent, too global. An erasure this vast requires a mechanism. It requires gatekeepers. So who decides what becomes history? It's not some secret society meeting in a shadowy room. The truth is more mundane and far more disturbing. For centuries, a select few have acted as the librarians of our past. Museum curators, academic bodies, religious authorities, and government agencies. They aren't necessarily conspiring, they are simply maintaining a system. And any discovery that threatens to upend that system is quietly and efficiently filed away. Think of the great museums of the world. We see the pristine exhibits on display. But what about the basements? Down there, in miles of archives, sit countless wooden crates marked uncatalogued or origin unknown. These are the homes of the objects that don't fit, the artifacts that defy explanation, left to gather dust in the dark. Consider the Vatican Apostolic Archives, with over 50 miles of shelving. How many first-hand accounts from missionaries describing encounters with ruins or peoples that defy the official timeline are sealed away from public view under classifications that won't expire for another 100 years? It's not just ancient history. Look at modern military exploration reports from places like Antarctica or the deep sea. The public versions are released with entire pages blacked out, huge sections of data redacted into oblivion under the guise of national security. One anomaly is labeled a hoax. A dozen are dismissed as curiosities. But when thousands of inconvenient truths are systematically collected, classified, and buried by the very institutions we trust to preserve our history, you have to ask why. What were they? What are they so desperate to hide? The answer, it seems, is written in the bones. And Dr. Finch's diary is about to show us a forensic nightmare. Let's go back to that leather-bound journal. Let's leave the dusty archives and the redacted reports and look at the evidence Dr. Finch drew with his own hand. He wasn't just sketching large bones. As a physician, he was documenting a biology that terrified him, a physiology that has no place in the natural order. Let's look closer at his drawing of the skull. Can you imagine his hand shaking as he drew this? He documents not just its immense size, but its features. The jawbone is heavier, thicker than a human's. But the truly disturbing detail is inside. A complete, fully formed double row of teeth, perfectly aligned. This isn't a random mutation. It's a feature as deliberate as the fins on a fish. He moves to the hands and feet, noting they possessed 6 fully functional digits, each bone rendered with anatomical precision. But it gets worse. The most shocking sketch is of the torso. Finch draws the rib cage, and it's not a cage at all. It's a solid, fused plate of interlocking bone. A kind of biological breastplate that would make the creature incredibly resilient to crushing impacts. This wasn't a man suffering from gigantism or some other pathological condition. The consistency across the multiple skeletons Finch describes makes that impossible. This was a species built for strength and survival on a scale we can't comprehend. With a biology so alien, it feels like it's from another world. The librarians of history would want you to believe finds like this are mere curiosities, pathological mistakes. But the detailed, consistent anatomy staring back at us from these pages tells a different story. This wasn't a mistake of nature. It was a blueprint, and it forces us to ask an even more terrifying question. Who or what were they fighting? That blueprint, written in bone, tells us what these beings were. But it's a silent, terrifying voice from the dawn of civilization that tells us what happened to them. The crown jewel of this hidden history isn't a skeleton or a strange artifact. It's a set of small clay tablets, discovered in the ransacked ruins of a Mesopotamian palace library. For decades, they sat in a museum drawer, mislabeled as a common grain inventory. But a recent, painstaking translation revealed something else entirely. These tablets aren't a king's list or a receipt. They are a lament. It's the personal account, the final testament, of a man who calls himself only the last scribe. He isn't writing about gods or demons. He writes of the beings he served, a civilization he calls the architects. He describes them not as giants, but as masters of the physical world, beings who could sing stone into shape and weave light into solid forms. His account is filled with visceral, sensory details that make his lost world feel terrifyingly real. He describes the sounds of their cities, not as a chaotic noise, but as a constant, low-frequency hum that shook the mountains to their core. He recalls the smells of their workshops, writing that the air was always thick with the scent of ozone and burnt metal, the byproducts of a technology we can't even imagine. It's a first-hand account of a world that shouldn't have existed, a personal witness to the impossibilities drawn in Finch's journal. But his lament is not a celebration. It's a warning. The scribe's final tablets describe the end of his world, and he doesn't speak of a flood or a famine. He speaks of a final, terrible event that wiped his masters from the face of the earth. The final tablets of the last scribe are almost too difficult to read. The cuneiform script becomes frantic, carved into the clay with a desperate, hurried hand. He describes the final days as the constant creative hum of his world was replaced by a new sound, a piercing shriek that seemed to come from the sky itself. And then, the end. This wasn't an act of God, it was an act of war. The scribe gives a terrifyingly clear account of the final moment. describing how a second sun lit up the horizon, a light so brilliant it bleached the world of color. He writes of a wave of heat that followed, a force that boiled the oceans and turned the ground to glass. For centuries, we've been finding evidence of this exact event. Across the great deserts of the world, from Libya to the Mojave, vast stretches of sand have been fused into sheets of eerie green glass. Our scientists have a name for it: vitrification. The official explanation is the impact of a massive meteor, a cosmic collision generating unimaginable heat. But the scribe's testimony offers a different, more chilling truth. The heat didn't come from a rock falling from space. It was unleashed on the surface. It was the final, terrible act of the architects. The second sun was a weapon. And in one blinding flash, a civilization that had mastered the physical world turned that mastery upon itself, erasing their own cities, their own people, and their own history from the planet. They simply vanished in a blaze of their own creation. This leaves us with the most profound mystery of all. Why, and more importantly, what happened to the few who might have survived? A civilization that powerful doesn't just vanish. It leaves echoes. And what if the most famous story ever told, the story of our own beginning, is actually the final, most profound echo of their end? After the fire and the glass, what would you do with the few who were left, shivering in the ruins of a broken world? You wouldn't tell them the truth. The truth would drive them mad. You would give them a new story, a simpler story, a story of a fresh start. What if the Garden of Eden wasn't the dawn of man, but a protected reservation for the few who remained? Think of it not as a paradise, but as a sanctuary, a biodome shielded from the poisoned earth and lingering radiation of the old world. And Adam and Eve? They weren't the first humans. They were the first of the new humans. Their memories wiped clean, their lineage deliberately forgotten. Raised in a state of manufactured innocence, their ignorance was their protection. In this context, the tree of knowledge of good and evil takes on a terrifying new meaning. The forbidden fruit wasn't about morality, it was the truth. It was the history of the architects, their science, their power, their hubris, and the unimaginable weapon that ended their world. To eat from the tree was to remember the apocalypse. The story of Genesis isn't a beginning. It's a cover-up. It's the most brilliant act of censorship ever conceived, replacing a history of technological horror with a myth of pastoral innocence, ensuring that the traumatized survivors would never seek to reclaim the terrible power that led to their own destruction. It's the final lock on the door to our own past, and so the lock clicks shut. The story of Genesis, our supposed beginning, becomes the final seal on a history of unimaginable power and self-destruction. This entire time, we've been looking for our origins in a carefully edited book, while the real evidence was all around us, dismissed as myth, mislabeled in museum basements, or redacted into oblivion. That gear in the coal, the bones of giants, the glass deserts. The scribes lament. They are not disconnected anomalies. They are the fragmented chapters of a single, coherent story that has been deliberately kept from us, perhaps with the best of intentions, to protect us from a truth we weren't ready to handle. It's a story that proves the ultimate power of knowledge and the even greater power of those who control it. They say history is written by the victors, but what if the victors simply left and erased the board on their way out? What if all that remained was a handful of traumatized survivors and a carefully constructed fable to keep them from ever repeating the same mistakes? The evidence, when you dare to look, is undeniable. It tells us we are not the first, which leaves us, you and I, with one final haunting question to carry into the silence. Are we the last? The story doesn't end here. There is more evidence, more hidden history waiting to be uncovered. If you believe the past deserves a voice, subscribe and join the search for the truth, because the questions we've asked are only the beginning.